It is the late summer of 1942, and the jungle of Guadalcanal is a living, breathing, green nightmare. The air is so thick with humidity you can almost chew it, saturated with the metallic temps of mud, rotting foliage, and stagnant water. Rain falls not in drops, but in relentless, suffocating sheets that transform foxholes into muddy graves. But for the young men of the United States Marine Corps, the climate is only a background terror. The real nightmare begins when the sun drops below the horizon, plunging the tropical canopy into an pitch-black abyss. In that darkness, the jungle belongs to the Imperial Japanese Army during the opening months of the Pacific War. The Allied forces found themselves locked in a horrifyingly intimate form of combat for which they were woefully unprepared. The Japanese military had spent decades perfecting a doctrine built around close quarters ferocity, night infiltration, and cold steel, rooted in the ancient warrior ethos of Bushido and refined through brutal campaigns in Manchuria and China. The Imperial Japanese infantryman was a master of hand-to-hand combat. They were trained in Jukondo, the deadly art of the bayonet, and carried the Type 30 bayonet mounted on their long Arisaka rifles, a combination that transformed an ordinary soldier into a formidable pikeman. Japanese officers swept into combat wielding ancestral or mass-produced gunto swords, lethal blades capable of severing limbs with a single strike. More terrifying still were the night raiders, silent, shadowy figures who slipped through American perimeter wire, armed with combat knives, short swords, and entrenching tools, executing silent kills in the dark before an alarm could ever be sounded. Against this terrifying backdrop, the average American Marine was dangerously under-equipped for close-quarters survival. When the United States entered World War II, its soldiers were issued infantry weapons and edged tools that were largely hangovers from the muddy, static trenches of the Western Front. In 1917, the primary issued blade was the Mark I trench knife, an imposing weapon featuring a cast bronze finger guard duster and a thin, double-edged dagger blade. While it looked terrifying on paper, in the chaotic realities of the Pacific jungle, it proved to be a disastrous failure. The double-edged needlepoint was prone to snapping off when twisted against bone or wood. The heavy brass knuckle guard made the knife unwieldy to draw quickly, impossible to hold in different grip orientations, and completely useless as a utility tool. You could not use a Mark I to cut thick vines, pry open wooden crate lids, chop firewood, or open a tin of rations without risking severe injury to your own hands. Other Marines carried civilian hunting knives brought from home, cheap utility pocket knives, or long, unwieldy bayonets that were great for fixing to the end of a Springfield rifle, but utterly useless in the claustrophobic confines of a jungle ambush or a waterlogged foxhole. The early Pacific Campaign exposed a critical, life-threatening flaw in American doctrine. The military had equipped its men with weapons for a war of distance, leaving them defenseless in a war of inches. The Marines did not just need a better knife. They needed an entirely new category of edged weapon. They needed a tool that was indestructible, perfectly balanced, capable of performing heavy camp labor during the day, and viciously effective at neutralizing an aggressive, skilled enemy in the dead of night. Urgent plea for a new combat utility knife reached the desk of Captain Howard America, and Colonel John M. Davis of the United States Marine Corps, recognizing that time was measured in American lives. They bypassed traditional, sluggish military procurement bureaucracies and reached out directly to private American cutlery manufacturers. They laid out a series of brutal, uncompromising requirements. The new blade had to be tough enough to chop through dense, tropical wood, open ammunition crates, and clear brush, yet light and nimble enough to serve as a lethal fighting knife in hand-to-hand combat. It needed a grip that would not slip when drenched in rain, mud, or sweat, and a blade geometry that could withstand severe torque without shattering. Several knife manufacturers submitted designs, but it was the Union Cutlery Company of Olean, New York, working in close collaboration with Marine officers, that unlocked the perfect formula. Designed by Union Cutlery's master craftspeople alongside military experts, the prototype was designated the USMC Mark II combat knife, but history would come to know it by a far more legendary name stamped onto its metal temps: crowbar. The name itself carries an aura of American folklore. Legend has it that back in the 1920s, Union Cutlery received a poorly written letter from a rugged fur trapper. The trapper detailed how his rifle had jammed while he was being charged by a massive, wounded bear. With no other option, he drew his trusty Union Cutlery hunting knife and managed to slay the beast. In his rough, barely legible handwriting, the trapper tried to write "kill a bear," but the ink smudged, resulting in the phrase "K.A. bar." Fascinated by the testimonial, the company adopted crowbar as a trademarked brand name. Decades later, as American Marines faced down a fierce enemy in the Pacific, that name would become synonymous with elite lethality. To understand why the crowbar became an absolute game changer in the Pacific theater, one must look at its brilliant engineering and metallurgy. The knife was built around a 7-inch blade forged from 1095 high-carbon steel. Unlike stainless steel, which can be brittle under high stress and difficult to sharpen in the field, 1095 carbon steel offered exceptional toughness, superb edge retention, and the ability to be resharpened on a simple river stone in the middle of a war. The blade featured a distinct clip-point design where the top edge of the blade swoops downward near the tip. This created an ultra-sharp piercing point perfect for thrusting attacks, while maintaining a broad, sweeping belly ideal for deep slicing and heavy chopping strokes. Running along the upper portion of the blade was a deep groove, often misnamed a blood groove, but technically known as a fuller. The fuller served a vital structural purpose. It removed excess weight from the steel without sacrificing structural integrity, shifting the balance point of the knife directly to the junction between the blade and the handle. This gave the 7-inch knife an extraordinary sense of lightness and agility in the hand, allowing a combatant to strike, recover, and slash with blinding speed. The hilt of the crowbar was a masterclass in ergonomic and psychological combat design. Instead of wood, metal, or plastic, which could split, slick over with moisture, or reflect sunlight, the handle was constructed using compressed, stacked leather washers. These leather rings were sanded smooth, treated with water-resistant sealant, and grooved around the circumference. The result was a grip that absorbed sweat, molded slightly to the owner's grip over time, and offered an unbeatable non-slip hold even when soaked in mud or liquid. The handle was given a subtle oval shape rather than a round one. This was a critical tactical innovation. In complete darkness, a Marine holding the crowbar could immediately tell the exact orientation of the blade edge simply by feeling the flat sides of the oval grip. At the front of the handle sat a sturdy steel crossguard, slightly curved to protect the user's hand from sliding forward onto the razor-sharp edge during a hard thrust, while also preventing an enemy's blade from sliding down into the fingers. At the rear, the knife was capped with a thick, heavy steel pommel attached directly to the full tang of the blade. This steel butt cap transformed the end of the knife into a blunt force hammer, capable of driving tent stakes, smashing glass, opening supply tins, or delivering devastating non-lethal strikes to an attacker to eliminate reflective glare that could give away a Marine's hidden position under the moonlight. Every square inch of the exposed steel was treated with a dark, non-reflective black oxide parkerized finish. The crowbar did not shine, it absorbed the light, remaining invisible until the moment it was drawn, when the first shipments of the USMC Mark II combat knife arrived at frontline Marine units in late 1942 and early 1943. The dynamic of Pacific infantry combat underwent a seismic shift. Armed with this new tool, the American Marine was no longer an ill-equipped defender trying to fend off superior hand-to-hand fighters. He was now armed with a weapon specifically tailored to shatter Imperial Japanese close-quarters tactics. To fully appreciate how the crowbar dominated Japanese hand-to-hand combat, one must analyze the tactical physics of a close-quarters fight in dense foliage. Japanese close-quarters doctrine was largely built around linear, extended weapons. The Type 30 bayonet, when mounted on the Arisaka rifle, created a weapon nearly 6 feet in length. In an open field, this gave Japanese infantry incredible reach and thrusting power. However, inside the tangled web of a tropical rainforest, or inside a cramped, earth-walled foxhole, high reach became a massive liability. A soldier trying to turn or thrust a 6-foot rifle and bayonet combination in tight brush could easily snag his weapon on thick vines or roots, leaving him completely exposed. Japanese officers carrying the long gunto sword faced a similar geometric disadvantage. Drawing and swinging a two-handed sword requires clearance and wide arcs. In the choking density of the Pacific jungles, an officer attempting a sweeping slash was often thwarted by overhead branches or bamboo thickets. This was precisely where the crowbar proved devastatingly superior. With its 7-inch blade and balanced heft, the crowbar was short enough to be drawn, wielded, and manipulated in tight spaces where a long rifle or sword was completely useless. A Marine armed with a crowbar could duck underneath the long linear thrust of a Japanese bayonet, close the distance instantly, and enter what military martial artists call the inside sphere. Once inside the reach of a long weapon, the longer weapon loses all offensive capability. The crowbar user could parry the barrel of an incoming rifle with his offhand or the knife's steel guard, step inward, and deploy rapid, short-range thrusts and slashes that were impossible to block. The clip-point tip of the crowbar was specifically engineered to penetrate heavy combat clothing, web gear, and leather accoutrements. When driven forward with the weight of an advancing infantryman, the blade could readily breach heavy military uniforms to target critical anatomical centers. Furthermore, the broad, curved belly of the blade delivered incredible mechanical advantage during slicing maneuvers. A swift backhand strike with a crowbar could easily sever muscle groups, tendons, or arteries, instantly disabling an attacker's limb before he could clear his own weapon from the surrounding brush. Moreover, the crowbar completely neutralized the psychological terror of night infiltration. Japanese night raids relied on the element of fear and the belief that Allied soldiers lacked the skill or tools for silent, hand-to-hand struggling. The crowbar changed that equation entirely. Marines were taught to sleep with their crowbar drawn or resting directly across their chest. If a raider dropped into a trench, the Marine did not need to clear a jam, find a safety catch, or maneuver a long rifle. He simply needed to drive the 7 inches of high-carbon steel upward into his adversary. The oval handle allowed the Marine to instantly index his blade in the pitch black without looking, switching smoothly between a forward hammer grip for slashing and a reverse icepick grip for close-range grappling inside a trench. The solid steel pommel allowed a Marine to strike behind him or smash sideways in an enclosure, using the butt of the knife to daze an opponent before delivering a lethal thrust. In the chaotic, slippery, blood-slicked mud of nocturnal combat, the stacked leather grip proved its worth thousands of times over, ensuring the knife remained firmly locked in the user's palm regardless of rain or sweat. The utility aspect of the crowbar also played an incredible, indirect role in bolstering combat readiness. In the field, a knife that is only good for killing is a burden. It sits in its sheath 99% of the time. But the crowbar was used every single day. Marines used it to chop firewood, hack through bamboo, to build concealed firing positions, dig drainage trenches around their shelters, open tin cans, cut wire, and clear lines of fire for heavy machine guns. Because the knife was constantly in their hands for everyday tasks, Marines developed an extraordinary, instinctive familiarity with its weight, balance, and reach. By the time an enemy soldier encountered a Marine in hand-to-hand combat, that Marine had already spent weeks using the crowbar as an extension of his own arm. That muscle memory translated into terrifying speed and confidence during a fight as the war progressed across the bloody stepping stones of the Pacific, from the hellish ridges of New Georgia and the coral fortress of Tarawa to the chaotic nightmare of Peleliui, the ash-covered slopes of Iwo Jima, and the mud fields of Okinawa. The reputation of the crowbar grew into something approaching mythic status. Stories spread rapidly through both Allied and Axis ranks about the lethality of the USMC Mark II knife during the Battle of Tarawa, where Marines had to leap into deep water under heavy machine gun fire and wade through razor-sharp coral reefs. The crowbar served as a literal lifesaver. Marines used the heavy blades to cut themselves free from entangled parachute harness lines, sever heavy web gear underwater, and leverage open jammed metal hatches on disabled amphibious tractors. Once on the beachhead, locked in point-blank combat with pillbox defenders, the crowbar was used to neutralize fortified positions through bunker viewing slits where rifles could not poke through. On Iwo Jima, where the volcanic ash was so soft and fine that traditional foxholes collapsed in on themselves, The combat took place in a subterranean labyrinth of caves, tunnels, and concrete bunkers. Japanese defenders would ambush American patrols from hidden trapdoors and narrow rock crevices. In these pitch-black, claustrophobic stone corridors, firearms were often as dangerous to the shooter as the target due to ricochets and deafening muzzle flashes that caused instant blindness in the dark. The battle for the caves of Iwo Jima became a quiet, horrifyingly visceral knife war. Armed with cobbers and hand grenades, Marines cleared the cave networks room by room, room by subterranean room. The strength of the 1095 carbon steel allowed Marines to pry open reinforced steel ventilation shutters and drive the blade through timber barricades, neutralizing defenders in close quarters where no firearm could be effectively aimed. The psychological impact of the Kobar was profound. For years, the Imperial Japanese Army had operated on the belief that Western soldiers were soft, overly reliant on long-range firepower, and unwilling to engage in the bloody, visceral reality of blade-to-blade combat. The Kobar shattered that illusion completely. American Marines not only accepted hand-to-hand combat, they actively sought it out when closing with the enemy, wielding their dark-bladed fighting knives with a level of aggression and tactical efficiency that shocked Japanese strategists. The Japanese soldier, once trained to believe his bayonet or sword gave him absolute dominance in close quarters, found himself outmaneuvered, outreached in tight spaces, and outfought by young men wielding a 7-inch piece of American industrial brilliance. The demand for the Kobar exploded so rapidly during World War II that Union cutlery could not keep up with production demands alone. To meet the massive military contracts, the United States government authorized several other legendary American knife manufacturers to produce the Mark II design to identical military specifications. Companies like Camillus Cutlery, Robeson, and Powell Cutlery produced millions of the knives. Yet, despite being manufactured by multiple companies, the Marines overwhelmingly referred to every single combat utility knife issued to them simply as the Kobar. The brand name had crossed over into the military lexicon, permanently embedding itself in the language of war. By the end of World War II, over 1.5 million Mark II combat knives had been produced, becoming an ubiquitous symbol of the United States Marine Corps. When the dust settled on World War II, many military weapons were retired, scrapped, or declared obsolete as technology raced forward into the atomic age. Jet aircraft replaced propeller planes, radar replaced visual spotting, and automatic rifles replaced bolt-action guns. But the Kobar remained untouched. Its design was so fundamentally sound, its balance so perfect, and its structural integrity so reliable that the United States military saw no reason to replace it. When war erupted on the frozen Korean peninsula in 1950, the Kobar was there once again, in the sub-zero temperatures of the Chosin Reservoir, where extreme cold caused rifle mechanisms to freeze and jam, and where winter clothing was so thick that lesser blades failed to penetrate. The heavy, sharp clip point of the Kobar remained unflinching. Marines used the heavy steel pummels to chip away at frozen earth, to dig foxholes, and used the carbon steel blades to cut through frozen canvas, ropes, and thick gear, all while keeping the blades ready for sudden, brutal night attacks by enemy infantry massing in the snow. A decade later, in the dense, triple canopy jungles of Vietnam. The Khobar found itself right back in its original element. In a war defined by claustrophobic jungle patrols, booby traps, tunnel networks, and sudden point-blank ambushes, the Khobar was once again the trusted companion of special forces units and recon marines. In the soaked, humid valleys of Khe Sanh and the dense, urban ruins of Hue City, the knife proved that no matter how advanced technology became, the necessity of a simple, virtually indestructible combat utility blade remained an eternal truth of war. What makes the Khobar legendary is not merely its combat record, but its profound simplicity. It is an artifact born from absolute necessity, engineered under the pressure of survival, and forged in the heat of a global crisis. It represented the ultimate synthesis of American industrial pragmatism and battlefield necessity. The designers did not set out to create a decorative art piece or an overly complex gadget. They built a simple, honest tool, high-carbon steel, compressed leather, precise geometry, and a dark, protective finish. They took the ancient concept of the fighting knife and refined it using modern metallurgy and tactical ergonomics, creating a design so perfect that it has remained virtually unchanged for over 80 years. Today, the Khobar occupies a rare, exalted space in military history. It is no longer just a weapon issued by it is a cultural icon, a physical representation of resilience, self-reliance, and combat efficiency. It is preserved in museum displays, passed down from grandfathers to grandchildren as treasured family heirlooms, and carried to this day by modern warfighters deploying to hostile environments across the globe. When you hold a original World War II Khobar, you are not just holding a 7-inch piece of 1095 carbon steel. You are holding the physical, tangible memory of young men who stood in the pitch-black, rain-drenched foxholes of Guadalcanal, the bloody surf of Tarawa, and the dark caves of Iwo Jima. You are holding the tool that gave them the edge when the world narrowed down to a few panicked inches of mud and darkness. It remains a stark, silent testament to an era when engineering brilliance met raw human courage, producing a tool that dominated the battlefield, reshaped tactical history, and earned its permanent place as an undisputed legend of war.